Welcome to the MVP show. Today on our show we have Andrew Welch. He's a business application MVP and a bit of a legend, really. Definitely a traveling legend, definitely a wine connoisseur and all-round great guy. Anyhow, full show notes for this episode can be found at nz365guy.com/187. Now let's get on with the show. Hello, Andrew. Welcome to the MVP show.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Mate, good to have you on there. I hope your liver has recovered. I understand recently you attended a Scottish summit.
It might be a few days, but it was a great time. And Mark and Ian and everyone did an amazing job organizing it. And we missed you, by the way.
I know. I missed it. I was actually... before I moved back to New Zealand, I was scheduled to be the lock note speaker for the event. So, the one that wraps it up at the end of the day. So, yeah, I tell you what, I did watch a lot of the feeds and stuff on the day and was a little sad in a way that I couldn't make it there because, man, those guys know how to put on a show.
They do. We had one of my colleagues I brought to this event. It was her first Saturday event that she'd been to. And I said, this is crazy. There's about 1,000 people here. This is the biggest one there's ever been. The second largest there's ever been happened 3 weeks ago, and it was Saturday London. And I think there were 500 people there. And probably the third largest one there's ever been was probably still half the size of that. So February set records for Saturday Power Platform in the UK.
It sure did. It sure did, right? And it's just so awesome that, those guys, when they started out, we're told, you couldn't get 30 people in a room in Scotland that, knew anything around the Power Platform. The last year, I think they did, 300 odd? And then this year, over 1,000. Isn't that nuts?
Yes. And there was a guy there who I met, he was really just proud of how this was happening in Glasgow. I think he'd lived in Glasgow his entire life, and he said it almost made him tear up just sort of seeing all of these people come from all over the world, and the fact that the indisputably largest one of these events was in Scotland. So it was really cool.
So it kind of tempts me in a way to go, you know what? Here I am at the bottom of the world in New Zealand, a long way away from everywhere, but probably got one of the most pristine countries in the world from a nature, landscape, people perspective. And I'm wondering, should we try and put an event of this type of scale on in New Zealand? I think I could get some, top mark speakers. I assume you'd be up for it.
I'd be up for it. That would be. I've never been to New Zealand, and I'd love to do it.
Yeah, I was thinking if I came up with a strong business angle, as in that a lot of US and European business folks would go, man, I need my people to go to that to get trained. It's just like I've had this concept for a while about how about we go to Antarctica or the Antarctic, right? And we do it via chartering a boat and running, Power Apps training on board for a week for executives, And how many executives will go, man, yeah, I need to attend that, right? I got to get a handle on this from all over the world. And of course, you do a couple of days training on the boat, but of course end up at the bottom of the world on the ice. And
so, it's funny that you say that because this was quite a while ago. This was maybe around sometime 2014-ish, 2013. I'm thinking about the year. So it would have been early. Yeah. So it would have been right around then. I led the team that we implemented. It was CRM 2011 at the time that we were using, and we implemented it on Antarctica for the joint New Zealand American scientific mission down there. So I have actually implemented CRM 2011 at the South Pole.
So we need to do a live case study review, right, on location.
Oh, absolutely.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. So anyhow, your name is Andrew. Tell me, Andrew, what part of the world do you come from? I take it you're an MVP because you're on the show.
I mean, I heard that. That's what they said. So as long as it's legit. Yeah.
The,
So
the show's legit. Now, what we're here to decide is whether you are.
whether I'm legit. Well,
Yeah.
so I increasingly think that when people ask me what part of the world I'm from, I should tell them the sky, because I think I've now crossed the Atlantic Ocean 7 times in 2020, 6 or 7 times, something like that. So, um,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So,
Wow. That is
so
nuts. And that was all just in the last 6 months, right?
no, that was all in the last. Well, what's this? The 2nd of March now. So January, February, and 2 days in March. So it's
You're kidding me.
yeah.
Wow.
we I've done a and this has been all in service of our business applications cause, right? Whether work or community. But it's yeah, I went from some meetings in San Diego, and I went to London, and I was in London for a couple of weeks, and Lee Baker and I presented at the Power Platform User Group in Belgium. And then I came back. I went to my niece's wedding. I went back to London for Power Saturday. Then anyway, so I at this point, I think I've probably spent more than half my time kind of operating out of London so far this year. But technically home is outside of Washington, D.C. So both are great cities, and I really love both cities. So I'm torn between them, I have to say.
Wow. Wow. And they wonder how this virus has got into the US. And I think I've I've just found the main carrier.
You know, my boss told me, I talked with him. We had our weekly one-on-one last week, and I was with a client in Copenhagen last week, and we did our weekly one-on-one. And he laughed at the end. He said, "By the way, just so you know, I've been telling everyone around the office that you are the one spreading coronavirus," which is a dubious claim to fame. But so far, I'm doing all right.
Classic. So, anyhow, viruses aside and things like that, how did you become an MVP?
Oh gosh, I so I had been working in this technology area. I came from a dynamics background for a number of years, and I guess the literal way I became an MVP is I made friends with a guy who just gave me such good advice and took wonderful care of me early on when I was kind of coming to the community and joining the community, so to speak. And that would be the great Chris Huntingford. And he was so good to me and introduced me to everyone he knows. And I started going to these events, and I started writing and presenting at these events. And it's just been really, I don't even think of it as like, how did I become an MVP? For me, it's sort of like, I go to these things because some of my very best friends, they feel like family. That's who was also at these events, and I wouldn't miss them for the world.
So let's unpack that concept of family, because definitely there seems to be, within this MVP community, and I don't know if it's just in our area, which is, Microsoft Biz Apps, which covers everything from Dynamics 365, of course, to Power Apps, Power Automate, the whole Power Platform. Why do you think there's that strong sense of family within our community that, for me, I just feel like it doesn't matter where I go in the world, there's people I can connect with, hang out with, people that I don't have to have a pre-agenda to go hang out with them.
I think about this all the time, and I mentioned my colleague who is one of the architects who works on my team here at AIS, and I had her, I invited her to come to Scottish Summit, and I think as a result, sort of getting to see one of these events almost through new eyes, or at least through the perspective of someone who hasn't been quite as exposed. So I did a lot of thinking about that this weekend, and I never can quite decide if this is the result of, if this wonderful sense of family that we have in this community is the result of the fact that we got lucky, and maybe some of the early comers were just really kind of friendly, wonderful people. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's that. I think about this group. It's just at this point, really probably thousands, MVPs or not, thousands of just incredibly decent human beings who take care of one another. And the introverts and the extroverts, it doesn't matter. Sometimes if you need to go and skip something because you need a quiet moment, that's just fine. But, just really decent human beings who all take really good care of each other. So I wonder, maybe we just got lucky. Sometimes, though, I think, well, maybe it's because in this world, when you think of what we're doing with Power Platform and this technology, maybe it's the kind of the type of personality that gets attracted to this technology. Maybe it's about building things that are beautiful and useful, and the fact that we have to be we help people solve problems, so we help customers solve problems, so maybe we help each other solve problems. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but I've thought about it a lot because it really intrigues me.
Yeah, yeah, so true. You mentioned there about introverts, and it's interesting because I was writing some notes on a podcast I'm doing with a regional director shortly, not even in our category, but very interesting guy. And I decided to put in a question around introverts into the podcast we'll be doing in the future. And what is your thoughts on that? How do introverts really engage in the space that we're operating in?
Yeah, so I think that I have some really wonderful friends who would characterize themselves, as being introverted or even quite introverted. And so one of the things that I've tried really hard, as someone who I really feed, I think, off of the energy of others. So as someone who is not an introvert personally, or at least I don't consider myself to be, I've tried to work really hard to be aware of the situations, whether they might be there's just so many people here, or there's so much noise, or there's so much chaos or commotion or whatever, to just be really aware of situations that I might really be delighted by, but that some of people who I really care greatly about and really want to be part of the family, maybe not as quite as delighted by that craziness as I am. And so I think part of it is that I go back to the decent humans thing. I think that by and large, this crowd of people are really good at paying attention to one another and understanding that we're all so different in some ways, but that we share things that are important. We share kind of a love of learning about the world, and a love of building, as I always say, beautiful and useful things. And really, I think in a lot of cases, a love for, one another and for one another's company. So like I said, I can't ever probably put myself fully in the shoes of someone who doesn't like the crazy. But what I can say is that there's some really complex personalities here in this group. And I think if you look around, what you'll find is that there's multiple sides to everyone, and I think that we have tended to just be really good at kind of meeting each other where we are, and helping each other find our own kind of unique places and unique ways to be part of the family.
Can you think offhand of any folks that are in our community that are that you would maybe think, yeah, they're introverted, but they are still doing well in our space?
Yeah, I actually can, and I had one person on my team here at work. She told me recently. She said, "Yeah, I've been really trying to get in front of people and give these presentations, and I'm so nervous giving them, but I'm just so happy about how people have supported her." And actually, my colleague who I referenced just now, I won't share her name because she did just get nominated. She did just get her MVP nomination, so hopefully she'll have an opportunity to shine here and maybe be on your show someday. But other folks that I can reference. One of my just absolute very best friends in the world is Manuela Pichler. And Manuela tells me sometimes that I'm nuts or whatever, but I'll tell you, there is no one in this community smarter than her who's doing more for the community. But sometimes when we're at one of these big events, she'll say, "Hey, you know what? I'm out. I gotta go." I also think getting away from personality types or whatever. There's another. Someone who I think has just been making really wonderful contributions along the lines of, kind of along these lines, is my really good friend Emma Darcy. And Emma has been taking up this topic of imposter syndrome, and she gave a really wonderful presentation. I hear it was a wonderful presentation. I was, I think, presenting at the time at Scottish Summit, and she told me that there were some people crying in her session by the end, just because it really kind of, it was just a great way to connect with people's sense of, do I belong here? Do I not belong here? Do I know enough to be able to contribute effectively? And I can tell you that in so many cases, usually what I find is that if you're asking yourself, do I belong here? And if you're asking yourself, do I have enough knowledge, or do I know enough to be able to contribute? That's a level of self-awareness that to me often indicates, yes, you do have the knowledge to be able to contribute, because you're taking the time to actually challenge yourself and ask those sorts of questions. So I think that very few people right now are doing more in the community than Emma to encourage others to find their voice and kind of figure out what their big thing is.
So true. And yeah, she's doing a phenomenal job. I was even thinking about, could I do a presentation on imposter syndrome? I think I'd be very hard for me to do a presentation, even though I get it, I understand it, and I've felt, I've been there many times myself. But she really is a brilliant communicator when it comes to this.
She really is. She really is. I have so much respect for that message that she's talking about right now. And like I said, I mentioned Manuela. I just have so much respect for her and for everything I've learned from her. And she's just one of my very, very favorite people.
Yeah, as in, she's been on the podcast, and just an epic individual. I'm so pleased she's gone on to work at Microsoft. I just think the value even what I'm seeing of what she's producing inside there at the moment is just next level phenomenal.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, Pete, there's word on the street that you got some Viking blood in you. Is that right?
So, Jonas Rapp says that Andrew really puts the ish in Swedish, which I think is hysterical. Yeah. So, there's a I think it's really true. Very little is more American than thinking that you're from somewhere else. And I was born in the United States. I have a blue passport. This is home. I live outside of Washington, D.C. But when I was growing up, being Swedish was very, very important to my upbringing. So I spoke Swedish with my great grandmother, and we went to the Swedish church, and we celebrated holidays with Swedish traditions and ate Swedish food. And every Saturday morning, my mother would cook plättar, which are basically Swedish pancakes. And my pronunciation is terrible, but yeah, I was one of those kids who, just like everyone in Boston, so many people in Boston, they grow up being told that they're Irish, but half of them haven't ever actually been to Ireland. I definitely grew up being told that I was Swedish, and it's very, very important to me. But I actually do try to go back to Sweden and visit my cousins, 4, 5, 6 times a year if I can. I
think that's where I first met you, isn't it?
It may have been at Saturday. It may have been at Saturday Stockholm.
2 years ago? Yeah, yeah.
I think so.
Wow, it changed my life, man.
Yeah, you haven't ever stopped looking around corners to make sure I wasn't there ever since.
Well, of course, with the Power Platform Happy Hour in London, kicking off and taking off last year, you seem to be almost more regular than the local Londoners at that event.
So at this point, I do sometimes wonder if I live in the Kensington Hilton, which surprisingly really good deals on rooms. Yeah, I love being in London. London is one of my very favorite cities. London is the capital of Power Platform, the global hub for where business applications happen. It's just such a concentration of wonderful people and smart people, and I love those happy hours. I was thinking, since the summit in Barcelona has been postponed next week, that we should do an epic Power Platform happy hour in London next week, and we should call it Barcelondon, and celebrate the fact that we don't have to travel far to find one another.
So I take it you're going to be in London next week.
I'm sort of torn, actually. I haven't decided yet. I go back and forth on on the current situation with the coronavirus and thinking, you know, how bad is it going to be? What kind of impact is it going to be? To what extent should people be traveling? And yeah, so I'm torn. I haven't decided if I'm going to be there next week, but I really want to be. I'll give you that.
Okay, do you want to make any predictions, being that this is going to be a time-stamped event here? We're recording this on, what is it? For me, it's Tuesday, the 3rd of March. What are your predictions around this whole setup?
I'm not. I don't think I'm in a position to make predictions, but I will make an observation, and that's that I think that we make a mistake when we think about it just in terms of how sick we as individuals could be, because I think that I've done a lot of reading about this the last couple of weeks, and I look and I say, well, so there's a lot of evidence to suggest that, hey, most people are going to experience this as a bad cold or bad flu. But I think that the hidden part of this that people aren't thinking about is what a sudden outbreak of bad cold and bad flu can do to global or national or local infrastructure. So I'm actually far more concerned about not about every individual and whether or not they will get sick, but I'm far more concerned about whether there will be enough hospital beds or whether subway systems need to be shut down, and what the kind of ripple effects of that are. So I think we need to be thinking of things like this as systems, not as individuals.
Yeah. So that's what's blowing me away, I suppose, in my observation the last couple of days, apart from the impact the disease has had onto various people, is the if you look at, what was it, 1918 was the Spanish flu, or influenza. And then I was reading an article by Bill Gates, and he was saying the difference now is our ability to transport is like a multiple factor above what it was at that time. And I mean, you've just talked about how much you're in aircraft traveling, let alone all the other forms of transport. And that is what's crazy to me, is how it has impacted the global stock markets, how it's absolutely destroying tourism at the moment, as well as aircraft, transportation. All of the airlines are, but even I wouldn't be surprised if it impacts the IT sector to a degree.
Oh yeah, no, I think we're going to see it. I think we're going to see it everywhere. I think in a way, maybe the IT sector has something to contribute here because, we are probably more used to than say other sectors. You may be more used to working from home, for example, when we need to. And so I think that employers need to be. I think that employers need to remember that this is my opinion, their first and foremost responsibility is to their people, to their employees. So I think that encouraging people to stay home when you're sick is important. But maybe that's something that we have a little bit better, a little bit of a better history with than say other sectors. So it's interesting to me, I think.
Yeah, totally. It's going to be interesting times in the weeks ahead. But anyhow, that aside, what's your number one blown away, didn't expect in becoming an MVP?
I think that I think I got to go with how the same as it was before I became an MVP, it feels in a lot of ways. And I think that and what I mean by that is that becoming an MVP has been a really, I think, personally satisfying thing. Like I'm proud of what I did to become this, but I also think that it really says something for all of the for so many other MVPs and other people in the community that you don't need to be an MVP to be embraced. You don't need to be an MVP to have something to share. You don't need to be an MVP to have something to contribute. And you don't need to be an MVP to be part of this global family. So in a lot of ways, very little has changed for me. And I think that probably some people would do better to think of being an MVP as something that is something that is personal rather than public or performative. It's think of it first and foremost as a source of satisfaction in the work that you do. But if you don't love the work that you do, it doesn't matter if you're an MVP because, folks here really will will embrace you either way. I think that's important to remember.
I like it. I like it. Before we get on to quick fire questions, tell me about the best wine you've sampled lately.
Oh, the best wine I've sampled. Gosh, I was telling someone recently about and I think I used the same example on your show the last time. So, how about instead of the best wine I've tried recently, I'm going to go with my favorite new wine bar right now, and it's a place called the Kensington Wine Rooms near the Notting Hill Gate tube station in London. Really great. Not to take away from Lady of the Grapes and Terroirs over in Charing Cross area. Those two are my all-time favorites. But if you're in London or you're passing through London, check out those three. They're really great spots.
Mate, you're making me homesick for London now.
I live in a perpetual state of being homesick for London, so here we are.
Okay. Let's do some quick fire questions now. This is a very unique situation in that I have not even read these before I'm going to read them to you on here. So I have no idea what these are going to say, but here's the first one. Would you rather be slightly late or super early?
Ooh, I think I'd rather be slightly late.
What are you worried about the next generation?
What am I worried about the next generation?
Yeah. Like, boring, but anyhow, yeah, what are you worried about?
I'm worried about the next generation that I'm worried about the next generation that the current generation, that my generation won't get to start taking over the world sooner because the generations that have come before us won't get out of the way. So it's sort of we'll call it the Prince Charles effect. How's that?
Help take those knives out of your back soon. Are you a cat or a dog person?
Definitely a cat person.
So I read that as you hate
dogs.
No.
I do not hate dogs. I do not hate dogs, but cats are much more self-sufficient than dogs.
How did you meet your best friend?
How did I meet my best friend? I think that we kind of looked across the hallway at one another in the first or second day of uni, and we were like, or we call it college in America. I just got back from London though. And we were like, hey. And then that was that.
Wow. Very cool. Very cool. If you could meet any historical figure, who would you choose and why?
I right now, for a very long time, I would have always gone with Alexander Hamilton, and I might still go with Hamilton, but the why would be new. I would just want to assure him that he had at least one fan in the modern world before the show came out.
Yeah, before he got
before he was re-famous.
Yeah. What activity do you enjoy so much that it makes you lose track of time?
Writing. Particularly writing fiction.
Wow, very cool. Hint, hint, you must have a book on the way. Andrew, it's been awesome to have you on the show. If people want to connect with you online, how do they find you?
Twitter is Andrew D as in David Welch, Welch, Andrew D. Welch. And you can also look me up. My personal website is runwayview.com. I used to be able to see the runway of the airport from my house. I no longer can, but the website remains the same.
Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you're enjoying this series on... What is the series on? What is it? Is it a series? I don't know. Anyhow, of interviewing MVPs, then their journey of becoming an MVP. So I hope you're enjoying it. Remember, full show notes for this episode can be found at nz365guy.com/187. If you listen on iTunes, do us a favor, please, and go in there and give me a rating. I'm trying to get up to 20. I've got to get 20 evals before, my understanding is that it's a black art before I can actually get recognized on the iTunes store, and I still haven't hit that number, so I would appreciate it if you could do that. Anyhow, full show notes, as I said. For this episode, it's episode 187 at nz365guy.com. See you next time.